Good evening. I'm immensely grateful to the Financial Times for hosting tonight's event, which is effectively the London launch of Names Not Numbers. And what we endeavour to do in events like this here in London and up in Portmeirion, which is very far away but worth it when you get there, is to really talk about the meaning of life in the context of business, politics, culture, academia, technology, and who better, therefore, than to discuss it with today's panel. And really, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Lionel Barber to chair this evening's panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. I'm absolutely delighted to be hosting this British Davos. I'm sorry I couldn't bring the snow. First, I'd like to introduce to my right, Alain de Botton, a very widely known and respected philosopher and writer, born in Zurich, Switzerland, now lives in London. Over to you, Alain.
I want to talk about consumerism. We're living now in an environment where a lot of people are going back to an idea that we should wear hair shirts, live simply, not buy too much. The hero of the hour is in many ways Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who advocated shutting the gates of Geneva, restricting free trade, and essentially getting back to a simpler way of life. There's, of course, always been a great answer to Rousseau's desire to get back to the hair shirt and the simple life, and that answer has been most cogently framed by Rousseau's acquaintance Adam Smith, who replied to Rousseau that the only problem with such a society is that you will end up with the bottom 10 to 15% of your population starving. And so, in other words, the defense of capitalism is not that it creates virtuous societies. Rather, it stops the poorest from dying and acquires its virtue that way. And we shouldn't search or try to justify consumerism in any other way other than simply prudentially and in terms of what it can do for the very poorest in society. That's something we often forget. Of course, this society is not virtuous. Of course, shopping is bad, etc. That's not why we should defend it. We should defend it for Adam Smith's reasons, the bottom 10 to 15%. I'm going to end it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alain. Our next speaker is Charlie Mayfield. He's worked for SmithKline Beecham, responsible then for the Lucozade brand. I'm sure you can find some way of bringing that in.
Now, the dominant model of ownership in the Western world has come to be seen as the joint stock company. But too often, and perhaps increasingly, we've seen the owners of those companies focusing a lot more on short-term gains and a lot less, in fact, on what really drives long-term success and the long-term interests of the companies they own. In 1963, over half the shares in UK companies were owned by individuals. That number is a lot less now. It's around 1/8 of shares in UK companies. And actually, I think, therefore, one of the things that we might seek to achieve is wider share ownership by owners who take a real active and responsible interest in the companies they own. And I think in the era going forward, where perhaps we will see less of return to shareholders coming from financial engineering or indeed from short-term speculation, and where prosperity will depend more on long-term growth, long-term sustainable improvements in productivity, that actually there's a real opportunity to rethink ownership and to perhaps think more about the potential for employee ownership, particularly in knowledge-based companies, and maybe through that to create a fairer form of capitalism.
Thank you, Charlie. Our next speaker, Professor Norina Hertz.
Businesses are seeming to be addressing social, environmental, ethical, and political issues increasingly proactively. You see, at a time in which people are increasingly turning their back on traditional politics, people are looking, I believe, at alternative power structures. And the interesting question, of course, which comes to mind is, what does this mean for government? Rules of the game do need to be set, unfashionable causes do need to be bankrolled, and there are financing gaps which only governments can realistically fill. Who in this room thinks that their lives are better than those of their parents? And who in this room thinks that the lives of your children will be better than yours? Oh. An understandable response. Every generation has the opportunity to make a change. Every generation has the opportunity to change our narrative. Politicians do, the public do, and business does too.
Thank you. We're now going to turn to our next speaker, Mr. Stefan Stern.
Ken Costa, speaking only last night, and in fact publishing an extract of his speech in the paper, declared that we became identified with the market and lost sight of its real purpose, to enable us to fulfill a duty owed by virtue of a shared humanity to the wider community. Financiers created credit out of nothing but eschewed the responsibility of the creator. I think it's worth asking how many people in his audience will seriously be going back to their offices to adopt a wholly new or largely new way of doing business. What happens when you have risk takers, brave people that we want at the head of our organizations, but perhaps excessively brave, with no sense of shame, with no sense of guilt? What happens? I asked a psychologist about this. He said, well, we have a name for people like that. We call them psychopaths. I'll finish with Shakespeare. When Macbeth is debating with his wife whether to kill the king or not, he says, I dare do all that may become a man. Who dares do more is none.
Thank you, Stefan. And now to wind up, Simon Sharma.
We are at a grimly powerful, monstrous moment, really, in the political history of capitalism. At least we feel we are many of us do feel that way in the United States. $900 billion worth of taxpayers' money does not seem to be going to investing in small businesses at all. We're through 10,000, don't know what we were today, and we're very shortly to be into double-digit unemployment. And these are two worlds. And I come to you from the memory of Clio, goddess of history. There were two worlds before the French Revolution as well. And there was a moment when the debts of the French kingdom, then owned by not the Chinese, but the Chinese of the late 18th century with the Genevans, when foreign policy simply and an army couldn't be sustained. Public policy had to stop, which brings me at the end to another wonderful, just a kicker in it, a wonderful headline in The Onion. US successful in building new model quagmire in Afghanistan.
Thank you, Simon. I won't try and sum that up. I'm going to throw it open to the audience. Who would like to come up first?
Especially in this country, people feel very cynical about politics, about politicians and about government. But let's not forget what politics is there for, what government is there for, and what democracy is there for.
And again, when you think about the green economy and you think about the innovations that are going to be needed, we're going to be needing business to be doing it. But God forbid that we left everything to business.
And it would be a great mistake, I think, for us to sort of assume that businesses can solve those social issues. They can play a part within a clear political framework and against some clear and determined political leadership.
And there's a debate at the weekend between Martin Wolf, Stefan and Lionel's colleague, and Phil Mullen, which was very much about Martin's angle that we should get back to the status quo ante, and Phil Mullen, who argued we need a wartime style, if not in effect, transformation of the economy, as perhaps we had during the Cold War, which led to the creation of the internet.
If you again look at the kind of catastrophe that is Detroit in terms of automobile industry, you couldn't be more right. It's an extraordinary paradox that after the disasters we went through a year ago, those who were left in the field, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, are bigger than ever. This needs to be a moment when we start unembarrassedly to talk about the nature of value in capitalist societies. Or else, it's not just capitalism that'll be in trouble, but democracy as well.
Thank you, everybody.